the Electile Dysfunction Podcast with Ashton Cohen.
Welcome back to the Electile Dysfunction Podcast with Ashton Cohen. I'm Ashton Cohen. I'm joined today by Matt Bilinksy. Matt is an attorney, a startup investor, and the host of the Prevailing Narrative Podcast. Matt, thanks so much for being with me.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Yeah, you came on my radar a couple of months ago. A friend of mine sent me over some of your content. She was like, you guys are both attorneys, you're in LA, you're both Jews, a real rarity. And she's like, you approach things in a very similar way. And I was like, I love this guy's content. And then a couple days later, one of my best friends sent me the Twitter thread you had, which went viral, about the shit show that's encompassing the LA Times right now. So I was like, I gotta get this guy on. So I'm glad to have you on.
My pleasure. And thanks once again. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. So a little bit of background first. You mentioned you grew up in LA. When did you start diving into political commentary? Because that could be a little bit risky in LA if you don't have the prevailing narrative.
Sure. Listen, I'm a transactional attorney first and foremost, and typically attorneys who are commentators on public issues, typically litigators because they're litigating issues, right? But that wasn't me. So, I've been in LA since I left for college. I came back, went to UCLA Law School, and was more of an entertainment attorney right out of the gate, but then pivoted. All the interesting stuff was going on with the tech world, so went more in that direction. And I come at it when someone says, "Hey, you're a political commentator." I was like, "Not really. That's really just one." That's one subcategory of the broader category of social commentary. And a lot of it's about just communication and speech, right? So also, if you're talking politics, you're also talking about how social media platforms work, right? Because that's where most of these conversations are occurring there, and the impact of these platforms and how they operate. So there's some convergence between, if you're interested in the online world and you're interested in its impact on public affairs, those two converge. So I was definitely started commenting a little bit more aggressively, maybe 2014, 15. And I started realizing, I was very much through my 20s and early 30s voted kind of Bill Clinton, slightly left of center Democrat, disliked Bush and the Bush administration, and, I saw Iraq, the disaster Iraq was going to be well before a lot of other people saw it. And I couldn't believe that other people didn't see it was going to be a disaster. So I rode that out for quite a while. Then, mid 2010s, I'm like, wait a second, man. The quote unquote liberal media that I thought a lot of conservatives and right wingers were making very lazy criticism of for a long time. I was like, oh, wow, they're now as bad as as these right wingers were criticizing them for. They used to not be that bad. 2005, they were not that bad. Okay. Then as the digital media business model blew up media and the quality corroded, I'm like, wow, the media is absolutely horrendous. They are indulging and accelerating this strange racial and gender pathology that through, let's call it 2012, even to 2014, was really only a Fox News fever dream and very fringe in the liberal world. And that's why, friends of mine that were conservative, how can you support this stuff? I'm like, I'm sorry, there's not that many people that support this stuff. This is fringe nonsense. These, really mean-spirited, aggressive, and I think irrational approaches towards gender and racial issues. And then I also kind of wake up and I'm like, wait a second, this seems to be gathering strength in institutions, amongst the media, and the media is really dishonest. And then Donald Trump comes around, and I don't like him, but I understand where he's coming from. And a lot of his criticism of the media is very accurate. Like a lot of times when he's claiming fake news, it's because it was fake and because they're blatantly misrepresenting what people say, whether it's Donald Trump or anybody else. So I was commenting a lot on, it was a lot of media commentary. Like, okay, here are the tricks that you see of how this media organization is lying to you or manipulating a narrative. And so, sure, that was kind of dangerous. And I think probably 2014 to 16, and even maybe 2017, I think a lot of people are like, oh, Matt, a couple of things, I think he's got a few on target criticisms here and there, but I think a lot of it, he's exaggerating a lot of this. Over the course of time, 2017, 2018, 2019, I get a lot more people saying, hey, my bad, I was wrong, you were right. I'm seeing a lot of what you're seeing in terms of media misrepresentation, clickbait, false narratives, things of that nature. Then that brings us up to the pandemic, where pretty much the entire world is now focusing on what information they're getting through the media and through social media channels. And my approach towards analyzing this stuff gathered a lot of steam, and a lot of people started gravitating. I kind of went viral through a few posts, and I probably, doubled my social media following in about 6 weeks. I think I've 7x'd it since the beginning of the pandemic, and just breaking down the pandemic news in terms of both the virus, the political commentary around it. A lot of people were like, okay, wait a second. Now I see what Matt's seeing, and I like the approach that he's taking to breaking it down. So that's probably, I was 2014, 15 to the beginning of the pandemic. I was doing it as a bit just of a hobby, and then it became more of kind of a cohesive thing since then. And my following has increased since then.
When did you graduate from college?
2003.
Okay, so you're a bit earlier than me. So we actually have quite similar trajectories, because I'm 31. I graduated college in 2012. I graduated a bit early, but my first sort of formed political opinions, and my parents as well, we all sort of track the same evolution. I've seen a lot of people like this as well, where they're immigrants. So we were sort of center left, Bill Clinton Democrats, and then the war in Iraq breaks out. And it keeps going and it keeps going. And you're like, this is just insane. Like this
they completely fabricated every predicate for this war, completely lied directly to our face. And I'm not okay with that.
Right. And there's trillions of dollars spent and soldiers' lives lost unnecessarily for a lie. And so, I don't want that. That's just insane. So it's like, I guess I'm a Democrat. And then, I go to college and from basically 2009 to 2012. Mm-hmm. And that's around the time where you see a lot of this racialism, this indoctrination, focusing on the most extreme fringe aspects of racial and gender ideology. And it starts in campus, but still hasn't really made its way into society yet. And now, and you're like, okay, well, this is insane. And then, as a Jewish student, as somebody who's pro-Israel, you see the most just vicious attacks against the nation of Israel, against anybody who supports it. It just, anti-Semitism was allowed to go rampant.
What was interesting, tell me if you agree with this, the hypersensitivity around potential offenses or microaggressions to every other group, and then just Jews being completely excluded from that. Right. And we are instead, the bar is raised for what would be considered offensive or a slight against us. Just like, wait a second, these things seem to be diverging, and it's not justified.
But the matter of the Jews is always a very interesting one in history, because the far left and the far right, the only thing they really converge on, well, there's a couple, but the main thing is that they both hate the Jews. And it's very much like the whole Stalin and Hitler thing, where Hitler blamed them for being communists, and then the communists blamed them for basically the evils of capitalism, right? And so, but then on the college campus, only the left, there are no fascists, so only narratives are the left-wing ones, and the far left ones are allowed to basically have carte blanche to do whatever they want. So then Jews are not, they're not white to the people who whiteness counts for, but they're not a minority because they don't quite fit the box. You see it a little bit with this affirmative action case we're seeing with Asian students being discriminated against.
Yeah. Well, it tracks back to intersectionality, right? That you're creating fixed, that you're, instead of saying, okay, our identity group is a relevant factor in who we are and how we order society, but it's not the prism through which we see everything. It's saying, no, everything, the primary prism, the first layer through which you should see the entire world is your identity category. And every interaction it can be filed or calculated as a power dynamic depending on your characteristics, what gender you are, sexual orientation, religion, whatnot. And this modality of thinking, which we spent 30 to 40 years trying to get rid of it. We said, wait a second, we got to get rid of that. And while it won't be perfect, while we won't have a perfect society, the way for us to move the ball forward in terms of racial harmony, a more fair and just society, is to judge people first and foremost, not on demographic characteristics. It completely inverts that and says, no, it's time. We need to be centering everybody's identity and their experiences based on their demographic categories and judging everything that way. And then once that's the first step. And the second step is then we order everyone based on power, right? So then when you look at Jews, and this is how the view, the perspective from the left-wing ideology that is supportive of intersectionality is that the Jews are very successful, thus they don't get the benefit of it, right? Israel is in the power position in comparison to its enemies. The Jews are, let's call it, as seems to be if we want to talk about the recent issues around, how the Jews are viewed in America, about financial success and business success. So we don't get the benefit of that, right? We're white and we're successful and we're at the top. of the intersectionality power pyramid, and thus we need to sit down, shut up, and learn. Right, is what they would tell us to do. So that's essentially what was going on, and what is still going on.
Right, and it's more sinister than just the traditional Marxist lens of viewing things, because under this intersectionality lens, like Oprah and Cory Booker get more points than someone like me, even though one grew up as the child of IBM executives and Oprah's a billionaire. But the class aspect is completely it's not completely removed, but it's ancillary to the most craven, disgusting racialist ideology where everything is seen through the prism of race. Do you think that people like the ones who buy into this stuff are being used as useful idiots by more powerful individuals who would much rather have the lower classes and the middle classes fight over just race and disregard things that actually matter?
I think that's one piece of it. But people that look people who ascribe it just to some people orchestrating it behind the scenes to distract people from material concerns and economic concerns, that's overstating the case. I'm sure there's an element of that, but no, these are true believers. These are true. These people have bought into an ideology, particularly from with social desirability bias, because this makes you look like a good, caring, decent, empathetic person, and that's how you want to portray yourself to society, and this is how you signal it. That's the driving force here. And secondarily, it happens to be distracting from material concerns. And yes, once you have to disregard and ignore so many relevant material concerns for this intersectionality power hierarchy to work, right? Mm-hmm. And so you are correct. Well, and it's strange, right? It is strange that those concerns overtook the material concerns,
right?
And it's created this strange dynamic where somehow the Republicans, who were the Mitt Romney "fuck the poor" campaign in 2012, and I'm going to go, my private equity company is going to go, take over your company and fire all the employees, are now somehow becoming the party of the working class. I didn't see that. That was not the case in 2012. I didn't see it coming in 2012. Yet that's what's happened. And so when we talk about Marxism, and this always sticks with me. In that George W. Bush dipshit Republican era of the 2000s, I met a guy who was probably the only hardcore conservative right-winger in the LA tech world. A guy from Georgia, super religious. And he was, at the time, he was off the reservation. He was so concerned with, these totally fringe left-wing groups that had 15, members, and maybe protested one day at UCLA, had not captured any institutions, and whose views were not reflected by anybody with any sort of power whatsoever. And he would use the term cultural Marxism. And I thought, oh God, what another fucking just Fox News blather, right? And at the time, it was the idea of cultural Marxism being at all the force in the United States was not true. However, now it has taken hold. It is taken purchase quite aggressively, and that's a lot of what we're talking about. Is that power dynamic, much like Marxism, builds kind of a fundamental precept of Marxism, is that everything is a power dynamic between the bourgeois and the capitalist class and the owners and the workers, and in every case, the worker has the moral imperative and the moral advantage simply by definition of being part of that class, and the capitalist was the bad guy. Similarly, it's the same thing, except insert white, male, straight for capitalists, and you build that hierarchy and that power dynamic that way. And I'm like, wow, it's weird, because I look back on that guy, believe it or not, he went a little insane. And back to Georgia, and the only remnants I can find of him on the internet are about him, accosting one of his neighbors in rural Georgia and getting arrested. So he went off the reservation. But unfortunately,
not allowed to say that either.
yeah, he was right about a couple of things, and him identifying cultural Marxism as a reality, although at that time a reality with very thin penetration, and now with very significant penetration. He was right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the best encapsulations of it was the Canadian trucker protest, where the supposedly pro-labor party is going down and putting its foot on the necks of literally. I mean, truckers are the most blue collar of the blue collar. That's the first thing. It's like cops and firefighters, but truckers literally control. The entire economy cannot exist without these hardworking laborers.
Mhm.
And they became the enemies, right? And that really goes to show you just like how much they've ceded the later versus position for these like fringe extreme.
Those views aren't fringe and extreme anymore.
Yeah.
That is the prevailing ethos of the governing educated class.
Yep. Yes, Andrew Sullivan said that we're all on campus now. I think that's a pretty good way.
Sure. That was it, and this was where people who disagreed with me in 2015 all came back, and I got to give you "I told you so" that they agreed with in 2000, even by 2018. In 2014-15, I saw some absolutely batshit terrible ideas taking hold and being things that people that conservatives accused the Barack Obama 2009 Democrats of being, that I never heard from Democrats at that time. I was like, well, what are you talking about? I don't hear this. It's not in the periodicals, not the magazines. I don't hear the politicians talking about it. I know a lot of Democrats. They don't say this. The stuff that they were fabricating, that Fox News would just kind of fabricate, I was now hearing being spoken unironically by a lot of people in positions of power. Okay, professors, people who ran newspapers, celebrities, like just the notion of white privilege. What a disgusting term to break down someone's life circumstances and cast aspersions at them based on their race and the color of their skin. I mean, when did you hear white privilege before 2013? You didn't.
No.
Right?
No.
You didn't. Well, how much have you heard of it since then?
A lot. And you can actually track this kind of stuff too, basically since the Occupy Wall Street protests. And you could see how many times racism has been mentioned in the New York Times.
Oh, it skyrockets.
Right, it skyrocketed. Like that around that time was an exponential rise, and it's been
sure. But
rising.
The tough thing describing causality is social media also kicked into extreme right for that as well. Exactly, so I mean, and this is something like I'll admit I don't have the answer. I can, and have you heard the term the Great Awakening? I mean, everything we're talking about in this period was termed the Great Awakening by Matty Glaser, who's a liberal commentator who sometimes is a very moderate, thoughtful liberal commentator and sometimes says the most ridiculous bullshit stuff to track. But he was very, very astute in identifying the Great Awakening, which is this period. And it's tough. Some people say, okay, it was Occupy Wall Street. That was the catalyst. I don't buy that. But also, I'm not entirely. Some of this stuff is so batshit, I can't find an explanation. The idea that you can choose whether or not you're a man or a woman, right? It's encouraging
blocker for children.
The delusions or illusions of children who are yet to go through puberty, and we're guiding them in the direction to disregard their fundamental biological nature. This is batshit insane. But good cases are made that it's social media with with everybody having an online persona and everybody's reputation being at stake, that being able to pose yourself as empathetic and as selfless and concerned with the downtrodden, much like capitalist worker, powerful demographic category, oppressed demographic category, that was so powerful, and it allowed the fringe liberal view to bully everyone else into submission because no one wants to look bad. No one wants to look like the callous and sensitive person.
Right. So another thing you see, and this gets to the piece you wrote about the LA Times, is it's often the case that the elites in society are the most concerned about these fringe and niche issues and speaking about it incessantly. So as you documented with the LA Times, so for people who don't know, the richest person in LA is this guy, Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong, and he purchased the LA Times. And his daughter, who's like a radical left-wing activist, which, and we can talk about this too, interesting phenomenon. Like, one of the only taxes I'm okay with is the inheritance tax for the super rich, because almost in every instance, the trust fund babies are like the most radical socialists there are for some weird reason. Why do you think that is, by the way?
Well, listen, here's the thing. In my experiences, trust fund kids are either great people or terrible people. You don't get any in the middle, right? Either they absorbed every great lesson of a super successful parent who had high character and succeeded because of it, or they're a person who is either spoiled or or a combination of one, so distant from any concerns or any true challenges in life, and guilty about that they attach themselves to toxic empathy to try to assuage their guilt and show that they're a good, caring person and not one of these, not one of these spoiled trust fund babies that they then they then, they support, or they essentially try to propagate ideas that do not impact them, but impact all the rest of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good explanation. I think it's Jordan Peterson who mentioned how if you are the child of a super successful person, your two ways of competing are either by competing them directly in business or trying to achieve success of your own, or by feigning that you're a more moral person, you're a more virtuous person.
Sure.
And yeah, and really, there's also like this real selfish component of it too, where it's like, obviously, if you are the child of a super elite, super wealthy person, you have all these natural advantages. But then if you can just say some of these empty virtue signaling kinds of things, this toxic virtue signaling rhetoric, then you also get to be a victim, right? So you get all the advantages of wealth, but none of the downside that could come with it.
Or like Nika Sun-Xiang, who we're discussing,
Right.
who has her own private security detail, but is making decisions for the rest of us and removing law enforcement personnel from circulation, and and putting us more at risk and vulnerable to those who want to attack innocent people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just plain and simple reality.
So this is the daughter of the LA Times billionaire. So she basically advocates defunding the sheriff's department. And what's her impact? I mean, the LA Times isn't as significant as the New York Times or the Washington Post, but it obviously has, it's, I think, it's in the top 5 in circulation, I believe, and it still has the brand.
Still the most significant newspaper in LA, because there's not really an alternative.
Yeah, right. In California, probably, yeah.
Totally.
Mm-hmm. So talk to us a little bit about what you documented with this, because I think it's a really interesting story. So yeah, this billionaire, he puts his daughter in charge.
All right. So Patrick Soon-Shiong is an Asian by way of South Africa. He was born in South Africa as an Asian immigrant, immigrated to the United States, became very successful, I believe, with cancer research and cancer drugs, worth probably $7 or $8 billion. Depending on whether you count certain individuals who live here part-time as full-time residents, he could be considered the richest guy in LA. He came on my radar because he bought a piece of the Lakers. And there's only like, I think 3 or 4. There's the Bus family, Philip Anschutz, and part they share the Staples Center with. And I'm pretty sure Soon-Shiong's the only other owner of it. There might be another very small minority owner. Okay, then he buys the LA Times. I'm like, all right, this guy clearly wants to be a civic leader, right? But the Lakers and the LA Times, I mean, he wants to have an impact on this city. And then, the LA Times takes a more liberal drift, just like all other major, coastal newspapers have over the past 5 to 10 years. But there's, in LA politics particularly, there is a movement of youth, hardcore socialist, defund the police activists, and more associated with this organization called the Democratic Socialists of America, right? Remember when those 2000 George Bush era Fox News conservatives would call everyone a socialist? And you're like, oh God, stop calling everybody a socialist. These people actually are socialists, okay? And this is a pretty significant movement amongst the youth in Los Angeles that believes in some pretty, if not pure socialism adjacent policies in terms of rent control. You can never raise rent. You can't evict anybody. We need to, quote unquote, address root causes, and that crime is that more police do not stop crime. That really, if we took money from law enforcement to essentially give to people who are in harsh economic circumstances, they'd stop committing crime. This is the whole movement. And then, I start noticing, oh, wow, Soon-Shiong's daughter is friendly with all these people. She's part of that movement. And you start noticing that some of her pet causes are being championed in pieces at the LA Times. Then 2022 comes around and we have elections this year. She's got a friend. She's close friends with this guy, Kenneth Mejia, who's a total DSA, defund the police fucking moron. And he's young, he's 31, and yet somehow he won the primary and is probably going to win for controller of Los Angeles. He has no qualifications for this. None, right? But he makes no bones about what he wants to do. He wants to cut police budget and redirect money and funds to God knows what program that Nika Sun-Shiong and these morons think, if we fund this program, all of a sudden gangsters aren't going to want to rob anybody. All the shootings are going to magically disappear. Nobody's going to get mugged. Nobody's going to get carjacked. It's ridiculousness. And Kenneth Mejia is endorsed by the LA Times. Why? Why is the LA Times endorsing Kenneth Mejia, a 31-year-old with no track record, no qualifications, right? Because he's friends with the owner's daughter. And then you start looking closer and you can see that her fingerprints are all over the LA Times. Okay. And not, listen, she's running the LA Times possibly not, right? I doubt she has editorial control over every story. But then, and I was trying to I was trying to find a variety of political reporters who would do a story on this because people need to know. But Politico went ahead and did it for me. And they spoke with a lot of reporters at the LA Times, even ones who were pretty liberal. They were saying, yeah, listen, like, we're liberal, but we're not this liberal. And we don't like the boss's daughter coming in and trying to throw her weight around. And she's clearly doing that. And there definitely is some internal controversy and strife about that. And so I took the Politico story and some other background on this and a little information about Mejia and some of the other people that, Nika pals around with. And I put together a Twitter thread, and it went viral, and it got a lot of exposure and hopefully woke a lot of people up to what's going on at the LA Times.
Yeah. And I can probably guess what her position would be on Elon Musk taking over Twitter, right?
Yeah. Oh my God.
Billionaire. Yeah.
Billionaire, blah, blah, blah. Oh,
Yeah.
well, how did I get any purchase or authority in life that my billionaire father gave it to me?
Right,
No one's listening to you. Nobody cares what you have to say except that you have a rich father. Okay.
So the thing about LA is that oftentimes it shapes California politics, and California politics often makes its way into the Democratic Party platform and shapes the rest of the country. So it's a pretty interesting case to look at. And this brings me to the other thing I want to talk about. One of the stories that didn't get as much national attention as I thought it might was what recently happened with the LA City Council. And so as a little background, in the last couple of years, there's 15 city council members in LA. And, LA is obviously, second biggest city in the United States, one of the wealthiest cities in the world, one of the most prominent cities in the world. And there's 15 city council members who control LA. 3 of them have either been indicted on bribery and corruption charges or are currently, their cases are ongoing and will be. And will be successfully prosecuted for them. And then you had another 3 in a leaked recording. They were having like a behind, a closed door conference, and they're saying the most vile, like racist stuff that the very kind of stuff in it. Of course, these 3 individuals, these council members were, social justice types, the kinds of people who call all MAGA people racist and Trump racist, and that. They're on the record saying that.
A little bit, but this is actually a little more complicated. Doesn't quite line up like that. But I'll tell you about it. Continue.
Okay, yeah, we'll talk about it in a second. Tell me where you disagree. So these individuals coming up, they managed to offend every single racial group imaginable in the matter of a few minutes, right? One of them, the president of the LA City Council, who's now has stepped down, called a black child a monkey. They offended Asians. They offended, in particular, Koreans, indigenous Mexicans. They made a slight at Jews, I believe Armenians as well. I mean, it was literally like you couldn't conceive of something like this. Is the kind of stuff that people will say that, conservatives talk about behind the scenes. But this is, very liberal city council members speaking like this. And I can't remember any politicians being caught saying something as vile in recent memory. And so one of them stepped down. The other 2 have so far.
One of them already got voted out.
One of them got voted out. Okay. You're talking about De Leon?
No, De Leon's sticking around. He's not going.
He's sticking around. Oh,
yeah.
So
Gil Cedillo
got voted out.
Cedillo is already got voted out. But here's the thing. Gil Cedillo is about to be replaced by a police abolitionist.
Right.
Not defund the police. Abolish the police.
Okay. So this is what I was getting at. Let me just finish this thought, because so you had 6 of these 15 the last couple of years who are either corrupt or found saying some of the most racist shit imaginable, and then much of the other city council members are exactly what you say. They're like the most radical left wing types that you can imagine. Yeah. You fund abolish the police, abolish prisons, that kind of thing. And this is LA. This is like the second biggest city in the United States. How's that even possible?
This is what I've been trying to wake people up to for a while, that the LA political class is the most worthless set of noobs, people with a low character that you could possibly imagine. And it's a miracle that it took this long for the city to start crumbling due to their incompetence. The fact that this city, for about 20 years, let's call it the mid-90s through the mid-2010s, was doing pretty well, is a miracle, because this has been going on for a while. Okay, here's a reality that a lot of people don't. The terms people of color, another term you didn't hear before 2013, because lumping every person who's not white together is completely ridiculous.
Right, and we all agree colored people was bad, but people of color is okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's all white people are like this, and all people who aren't white are like this, and that's just the dividing line. Ridiculous. Okay, sorry to break it to you. The Black community and the Hispanic community in LA, and particularly their leaders, I don't want to say they don't like each other because that's too broad. There's a lot of hostilities and a lot of rivalries. And in the LA political class, the Hispanic politicians are representing the Hispanic community's interest, and the Black politicians are representing the Black community's interest, and those come into conflict a lot. And that's what was expressed in these discussions. And here's the thing: if you caught the African American politicians talking amongst themselves, you record them long enough, they're going to say some pretty not nice things about the Hispanics too. This is just
I would,
works. And the LA city government is a spoil system. That's why we have all these taxes, a massive budget, and it is allocating and directing resources based on, aside from a couple, I don't think the most vile. They made a few racist remarks, which are certainly unexcusable. But beyond that, there was a lot of the conversation was about, hey, we need to reshape this district so that, for instance, LAX falls within your district because you control LAX, you control a ton of contracts and money that are directed towards LAX, and who gets to fulfill those contracts? So you get to direct the money to your buddies. That's what happens in LA, and this to a certain extent happens in all city politics. But I think now people are seeing that the incompetence and corruption in LA is demonstrably worse than your average city, and it's something that we cannot allow to continue. So that's what you saw, and the unfortunate part is, yes, Kevin De Leon, Nuri Martinez, and Gil Cedillo were more liberal. They're going to say some bad things about conservatives, but they're at the end of the day somewhat rational people in how they operate as politicians, and that they do care about public safety. Kevin De Leon, I think, has been terrible on 20 issues, and on public safety has been pretty good. Similarly with Nuri Martinez, but she stepped down now. And this was not Republicans aren't the ones who released these tapes. These tapes were recorded and released by DSA candidates, including Hugo Soto Martinez, who's running for city council and may win against a white guy named Mitch O'Farrell, who's the current city councilman in the Eastern District, Silver Lake, Los Feliz, et cetera, et cetera. And Mitch O'Farrell's great crime was he actually cleaned out the Silver Lake homeless encampment. You had every what an asshole that he decided to clean out one of the most grotesque badges of squalor. When he cleaned that out, local news interviewed an African American blue collar worker who cried. He was so happy because when he walked his daughter home from school past the encampment, didn't have to see naked junkies any longer.
Right.
That was Mitch O'Farrell's great crime, that he did this. But these sick, disgusting activists and DSA types, they think that that's fascist imposition on people, the downtrodden, and that the civil liberties of the homeless population to do whatever they want in unregulated public spaces trumps all of that. That too tried to take down Kevin De Leon and is trying to took down Nuri Martinez. So that's the dynamic at play. We have the most disgusting people on earth trying to take down heavily flawed people who are certainly more corrupt and incompetent than should be running the city. Right.
And, for people who are watching this outside, like LA, on a day-to-day, the kinds of people you meet, whether, overwhelmingly Democratic, but they're not that crazy, right? A lot of them are rational. None of them want the homeless issue. None of them want the situation where you can't walk home alone, right?
They don't do the work. They're lazy. LA voters are in the position they're in because they're lazy and they don't do the research about who they're voting for. That's how George Gascon got elected. That's why we're in the position that we're in right now. They hear bullshit and they just go with it. They hear George Gascon in 2020, I'm the reform candidate. I'm going to, this unfair aspect of the criminal justice system now, and I'm going to reform it. Sounds great. Nobody actually looks at what that looks like. That means not prosecuting crime and deprioritizing public safety at the expense of prioritizing accepting a level of risk from violent criminals because that's a more fair and just system and because it's punitive to lock somebody up. Okay, that's what that is. And they don't. Similarly with Karen, they still think that these people who peddle these stuff that sounds good right off the bat without doing any analysis to peel back the layers. That's it. That's how we're in the position that we're in. Everyone's always shocked, the Gascon thing is such a perfect example because, had I known that he was going to do A, B, and C, I wouldn't have voted for him. It was that he said he was going to do this and you just didn't pay attention.
Yeah. And this is an individual who doesn't allow sexual assault victims to be present or their attorneys present when their rapist is.
No, he removed all district attorney's office representatives from all not bail parole, all parole, right? The people of Los Angeles, the victims do not have a representative at the parole hearing, no matter what. And you want to know why? Because he believes that it is purely immoral and the society should not jail a person for life. He believes there's no crime, no crime. Rape, skullfuck, murder, an 82-year-old grandmother. You deserve to do 20 years and then you get another chance. No. Okay, he does not. He has a different belief system and values.
20 years, you really have to fuck up for him to give you 20 years.
Yeah. And for smaller crimes that, the smaller crimes that impact public order, that are bad people, that are people breaking the social contract to harm and impose themselves on other people in small ways, he believes we cannot incarcerate people for that. That incarceration is simply too significant a penalty.
Do you think, how bad do you think that it has to get before, and this is obviously a phenomenon in San Francisco, although they actually recalled their insane district attorney.
Yeah. When everyone says, oh, these things are rigged, there's no way that these recalls work. Well, San Francisco recalled their DA, so don't give me that. Yeah. If San Francisco can do it, then, listen, I have my thoughts on, and there's a legal case right now on the Gascon recall where it might turn out that they fudged the numbers and we might be able to get a court order to get a recall election. So let's see. But anyone who's saying, oh, it's all worthless, defeatist, don't waste your time with recalls. San Francisco recalled their DA and they removed a psychopath and inserted a relatively average, fairly average, good enough district attorney in his place.
Yeah, within the realm of normalcy. So how bad do you think it has to get before people actually embrace normal candidates again? Because this is so far removed from the Democratic Party that we've been used to, that we've seen, that we had in the 90s, for example. It's not a labor party. It's a human sort of degeneracy, anarchy in the streets, Mad Max party.
Yeah, it's a smarter man than me described it as glorifying dysfunction. Mm-hmm. So we're going to test this out because we thought that it did get bad enough, right? In terms of the pandemic conditions in 2021, and crime has not been as bad in 2022, and for a couple different reasons. One, there were a lot of high-profile crimes in Beverly Hills in 2021. Those decreased in 2022. You want to know why? Beverly Hills has its own jurisdiction and its own police department, and was able to hire double their police force by hiring private security in the bat of an eyelash. All of a sudden, no more carjackings on Beverly Drive. So
it's also probably the least liberal place in that entire area of LA.
Sure.
Right.
Sure. But the whole idea that more cops don't create a safer environment, I was Beverly Hills had its worst crime wave in the history of the city, more carjackings, more muggings, just an environment you'd never seen in Beverly Hills. And Beverly Hills just went, and all of a sudden you see all these vans, I think they say NatSec, private security, driving around. All of a sudden, no more carjackings in Beverly Hills. So don't give me this shit about more cops don't make a safer environment.
Do you think that Biden runs in 2024?
Absolutely. This is another thing that I don't get. Why do people think that people in power voluntarily give up power? They don't. Okay? And this whole Joe Biden's a puppet. A puppet for who? What does that mean? That doesn't mean anything. No. Joe Biden defied a lot of people and stuck to one particular approach and beat a bunch of Democrats in the primaries. And he thinks he won because of his strategy. Right. Despite him being right. So the most powerful person in the world is not going to voluntarily give up power. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. And there's nobody else in the Democratic Party who's powerful enough to take it. If he's not good, unless he has a stroke or dies, he's running.
Yeah, I agree with that. And do you think Trump gets the 2024 nomination?
No, I think DeSantis does, but Trump does enough damage in the meantime to hurt DeSantis enough that he might not win.
That's going to be the most interesting thing, is to see if DeSantis actually challenges him, because Trump is a wrecking ball. And
kamikaze.
He'll bring down any person with him, even if DeSantis survives it, which I hope he does. It can be rough. But if he gets in general, then he's running against somebody who is another 2 years more deranged than he is right now. Yeah. And right now it's looking god awful.
Hey, we'll learn a lot this week. We'll know, by a week from today, we're going to know a lot more. So we'll see. It's not looking good for Joe Biden, and it is looking good that, Ron DeSantis, fucking dude, people are putting money towards DeSantis, man. I mean, he has a massive war chest. And yeah, I run into a lot of people in LA who have a completely unjustified, irrational distaste for DeSantis that, you know, the same people who hate Trump. And I'm like, okay, I understand. I don't fully agree. I don't hate him as much as you do, but I get it. And then I'm like, guys, you're completely off the reservation on DeSantis. I doubt he has as many haters in the states that matter, like Georgia, Arizona, Ohio. Right. I think like DeSantis probably is well liked enough in those states that like you go throw a DeSantis debate up against Joe Biden and this election's over very quickly. But I don't know, man. I feel like Trump is going to be such a petulant child in not being gracious that he's lost to DeSantis, just like he wasn't gracious that he lost in 2020. And it could be, it's chaos. It's scrambled.
Yeah. And we should mention, I mean, it's a difficult calculation for DeSantis because he can either sit this one out and avoid the Trump wrecking ball. And he, you know, presumably will still be sort of the standard bearer, the next in line, or he can dive in and go against this, you know, get kamikaze, as you say.
Sure. Yeah, that's a decision he's going to have to make.
So let's finish off here. What is the thing that you're most hopeful about? What's the thing that gives you most worry?
I mean, what gives me most worry is this detachment from some really tried and true principles. Let's call it like classical liberalism, right? The judge people by their character, prioritize free speech, try to, you know, those principles that were like the types of things that probably appeal to me and you about, you know, center left Democrats from like 1970 to 2012, right? And that so few institutions now seem to reflect those values. That gives me a ton of concern that there's a certain like logical grounding in a few principles that I think we all had decided like were good things. And now you have a pretty significant section, you know, cross section of society, including a lot of people who control institutions who don't believe in that anymore. That's what concerns me. What gives me hope? I can't say I'm a blockchain utopian. That, you know, I run into some people who are pro crypto, pro blockchain that think that it's just going to create this pseudo libertarian utopia with everybody free, you know, of any sort of central authority. I don't quite believe that, but I still am pretty excited about the blockchain and what it can create in a lot of realms of society. That one, and then two, sure, there's some light. There's some bright spots now that some people seem to be waking up, who I think were way too cavalier in brushing aside some of this poison that's entered, that's contaminated the soul of the nation, and it's now like, listen, I'm going to be willing to get yelled at by a few idiots on social media to stand up for common sense and rationality.
Right. And to be able to walk home at night
yeah.
without fearing for your life. And, you know, the blockchain stuff, we talk a lot about, we have quite a few speakers on that here, mostly in the Bitcoin space. I agree. The decentralization, the sorts of things that it's going to enable censorship resistance, limiting the power of government over people's lives. And by the way, it's also kind of a Trojan horse for a lot of the values that are essential for our society, that I think it's a wonderful development coming forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Matt, thanks so much for coming on. It was a really fascinating discussion. The Prevailing Narrative Podcast. Where can people find more of your work?
Yeah, so primarily on Twitter and Instagram, MattBilinsky, Prevailing Narrative, every other Thursday, depending on the week. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, etc. And really appreciate you having me on.
Appreciate having me on, man. Thank you.
If you enjoyed our show, please click subscribe to stay up to date with our YouTube channel and podcast, and give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts so that we can keep delivering guys some great content. Thanks for listening, and we will be back next week.
We're going to talk about the issues that really matter. Our country, our economy, the Fed, QE, GDP, BTC, NFTs, AOC, the CCP, Cardi B, Yeezy, Yellow Socks, Iran, Joe Biden's dementia, come on, man, and probably sex robots. We stand for a free and open debate and exchange of ideas. And if you disagree with anything we talk about, you are a racist and no better than Hitler. What? Let's get started.